This is Synchronicity.
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 Welcome to Synchronicity. My guest this week features the return of Erick Godsey. Erick, man, what a special guy. I always leave. We here's a little auxiliary note to this podcast. We recorded it, I think a month and a half ago, and we had an amazing conversation. I think we were both microdosing that day. It was just awesome. Equally as awesome to this one, I'm happy to say, but it didn't record. And we had also been trying to schedule that one, I think, for God, I feel like a month at least, just going back and forth, missing, and I can't do it right on the day of. But whenever I get to connect with Erick, he's just such a refreshing person to speak to. I think a lot of it, and you know this if you've read his writing, erickgodsey.com will point you to all the stuff that he's up to. But if you've read his writing, he's just one of the most transparent and authentic and honest people. And you can just tell from his writing, there's nothing being held back here if he thinks it's going to be useful for other people or himself. And he carries that spirit basically wherever he goes. And this is a really cool episode because we touch on some of the things that I think this show really is about more than anything else. We start off we talking about some LSD and microdosing, but we very quickly go into some traumatic experiences people have had with psychosis and synchronicities, which is obviously one of our favorite topics on this show. And we have some really good thoughts around that. And just, when you're in a conversation, I don't know if you can relate to this. Because of this show, I have this experience a lot, but sometimes you'll get into a long conversation with someone and you don't really know where it's going. Not in a bad way, like, I don't know where this is going. This is weird. In a way, like, I don't know where this is going. And then over time, it emerges and you're like, oh shit, that's what this is. Very, very fucking cool. And this happens multiple times in this conversation with Erick, just because I think we're both kind of exploring territory that is just beyond the grasp of our conscious minds, but we're interested in finding any tools, anything, any modality that can help us shed some light on what's going on. This episode is great. Erick is great. Go check him out. He just started a new podcast, The Myths That Make Us. Is just a hell of a guy. Support him on his journey and what he's doing because, when you find cool people, you got to support them. Speaking of which, MindPod Network later this month, this is April 2019, will be featuring every 2 weeks a new guest speech, blarfish. We'll be featuring podcasters from MindPod Network. Whatever they have going on with them, we're going to be putting up on the site every 2 weeks. So we're going to get that kicked off with something from Ramin. And if you know, I've been doing this on syncpodcast.com. We're doing a book of the month, featured book of the month, syncpodcast.com. If you haven't been there, lots of stuff there. Featuring a book of the month. Ramin has a book coming out, Infinite Elephants. Ramin Nazar from the Rainbow Brain Skull podcast. We know this, yes, on MindPod Network. Excellent dude. Amazing artist, amazing guy, funny as shit. New book coming out. April 10th is when we're going to be featuring it on the MindPod site for a little bit, but it's going to be on the Synchronicity podcast site the entire time, so go and check that out. We're just going to be directing people to MindPod Network collectively so we can kind of basically signal boost this stuff. I found out, I hadn't checked in for a while, that the site gets a sizable amount of traffic still, so why not funnel that awesome traffic to awesome people, right? It's pretty easy. How about that for superlatives for people who don't like them? That's it. No, that's not even close to it. What am I talking about? I got a lot of shit going on. My mind is foggy, so bear with me. Eli got the Coxsackie virus. Parents, you know what that is? Yeah. It sucks. High fever. Then just weird shit going on for the rest of the week. So he's been out of daycare, and guess who's been taking care of him? I think there's a period here of this podcast. I don't know exactly when it is. I'd have to review. I want to say October, 3 months prior to October 2017. You can hear me slowly lose my mind on the show. And you get a little taste of that on this intro because taking care of a small child as your main priority while trying to do other things, including work and a podcast and all these other things, I know people do it. But man, if you can keep your sanity in that, you're basically enlightened, I think. Because mine slips away after about 5 days. 5 days of responsibilities and taking care of a small child is just it's slipping through my fingers. So bear with me in the intro because I do have a few other things to get through. If you can always skip ahead, right? That's the beauty of podcasts. You're like, fuck this. I don't know this guy. Oh, who gives a shit about this? Let's go ahead. 15, 30, 45 seconds. We'll be there. Four Sigmatic. Let's thank these fellows genuinely because they're doing something. This show, let's be honest, I'm not going to be a money driver for Four Sigmatic or for sponsors in general unless they're specifically aligned with what we're talking about on the episode. And this show, it ranges, right? I love that they're sponsoring it. I feel that I've done my part by pointing them to other awesome podcasters and people I know who I'm sure are making them money, which is great. But in the meantime, can we just, if you're going to foursigmatic.com/sync, pick something up. I genuinely drink the Mushroom Elixir. I've had it. I like it. I've genuinely enjoyed and had their matcha, their coffee, their cocoa. I'm not making this shit up. Why would I do that? So go and check that out. Again, foursigmatic.com/sync. There are links all over the place for this stuff on this episode. If you've ever thought about it and you're like, you know what? This is the day. Today is the day I'm going to do this. Then use the sync code, right? 15% off your first order. It's a pretty good deal. They're good people. The chances of them re-upping this, probably pretty slim, but they're cool guys. I like them a lot. All right, that's that. I think we've gotten through everything. That was it. Buy Bitcoin, right? Cryptocurrency. People are still a little weird about that when I say that. We'll see. Okay, without further ado, thank you for bearing with me. Here is Erick Godsey. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me on, brother.
This is the quickest shift from what I call off-the-air conversation to on the air, just because when you're like, I'm taking LSD on the weekends, I'm like, whoa, how much you taking?
I'm doing probably about half a tab. So I'm not going all the way in, but I'm doing enough where I'm for sure off of baseline,
right? But
I'm still able to kind of live the Erick ego life instead of completely obliterating it.
Have you done higher macro doses?
Yeah, I've done macro doses of LSD probably only like 3 times.
Okay.
And I've never done a quote unquote heroic dose of LSD. I've done heroic doses of mushrooms probably about 8 to 10 times.
Yeah.
Before I found real LSD, when I was young and dumb and thought I had real LSD, I would do like 4 tabs, but
right.
It for sure was not LSD. And the moment I did real LSD, I was like, oh,
yeah.
That was not it.
Yeah. That's it. So what's the, I don't know what the definition of a heroic dose of LSD is. What did Terrence define that as?
So I don't know if he quantified that, but I just kind of, my intuition is like anything over 400.
Oh shit. Yeah, no, that's definitely a dosey dose for sure.
I think the most I've done is 300, and it was the first time I had real LSD.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah. I think maybe I've done, thinking back of over 400 doses, maybe twice. Once on purpose. Yeah. Both times unintentionally. It was my first time, much like you, where you can dose.
Mine was unintentional as well.
Yeah. Which I think are good things. I think the people who I know who really just went like full bore all the time, like I will say, outside of my friends Sean and Cass, who are like probably the most intentional psychedelic users I know and aspirational in good ways. But for most other people who, at least in the college days when I was doing it, the people who just kind of willy-nilly take like a shitload and know that it was a shitload, I'm like, how? I don't understand that. You're kind of like, that seems nuts to me. But the mistakes seem to be auspicious in a lot of ways. So how regularly have you been doing this on the weekends?
So I started microdosing LSD probably about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
I hadn't actually really done LSD much up until that point. I was more into mushrooms, but I finally found a consistent, really high quality source about a year and a half ago.
Nice.
And I started microdosing, and I did the psychedelic explorer guide James Feidemann protocol, where it was, like 1/16 of a tab every fourth day, and I did that for probably 6 to 8 months, and then I slowly moved up to about 1/8 of a tab about every other day for probably about 4 months.
Yeah.
And then the work that I do at On It now got more intense, and it became harder to microdose on work days.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's been true probably about the last 3 months. And then basically what I've been doing the last 3 months is sometimes I'll microdose on a weekday, like I microdose today because I have a podcast, with you, obviously, I want, to kind of be weird and goofy and creative. But I tend to now do more than a microdose, but less.
Like a mini, I call it. It's a mini dose.
Yes. And I do those on the weekends. Because kind of like how I like to relax is I just like to, read the books I want to read, hang out with my friends that I love, and just kind of not try to do anything, but I like to show up and just, see the world in a weird way, which I love that LSD allows me to do that. So I've been doing that for probably about the last 3 months.
It's interesting. It's really interesting you started with the Feidemann protocol, because that's what I started with when I microdosed for the first time. And I did it for 3 months. Every fourth day, I diluted mine. I was doing the liquid. I like that approach. It's a little less. I mean, none of it unless you're accurately knowing that one tab is 100, or you're getting liquid stuff that is accurately weighed out. It's hard to get it exact, but 10 to 15 mics, and exactly kind of what happened. Not exactly, but after you go through that original protocol, you kind of make up your own, and then let your intuition guide you where and when you should be using it. It's very interesting. I have found that there are times now where I've taken or done a microdose, and I'm like, you know what, that maybe wasn't the best time to do it. Nothing went wrong, nothing was bad, but I was like, you know what, I think I could have, and I find those really interesting. And a segue to kind of like what you're slowly becoming, not slowly, you're becoming an expert on, Jung, is I've been thinking about microdosing related to astrology, and or just influences that are outside of our immediate subjective perspective, which is usually what we use to gauge, intuition. But there's, I believe there's something there I'm very interested in, which is why like something synchronistic happened today, where I can't tell you the last time I booked 2 podcasts on the same day, if ever. Today is the first day, starting with you, and then I have a Vedic astrologer on next.
Oh, wow.
So before we jumped on this call, I was like, you know what, let me bone up on some Jung. Because like, what's better than just like popping open a random page of some Jung and talking about it with Eric? Like this is the best person. So I popped open his, this will be the last thing, one of the last things you'll read in his collected works, but Mysterium Conjunctivitis. It's the hardest one to say, but it was written in his later years. It was basically his all of his alchemical wisdom and astrological wisdom is like poured into this thing. And the first thing I open up to is this astrological kind of journey that one takes towards individuation and how it relates to the psyche. And then I just want to read you something from this because it was like so interesting, dude. Listen to this. I got to go to the page. I have it here. I wasn't planning on this, but it occurs to me that it's kind of useful in terms of what we're talking about. I just lost the page, but I'm pretty sure I remember it was 172. No, I lost the page. I'll find it later, but I'll paraphrase it for you. Basically, he was talking about with the aids of tonics or tinctures, one could go through this journey, and he references a specific character in one of his like weird readings. But I was like, that's really fucking interesting to me that because I know in our last conversation, we were talking about microdosing quite a bit because we've both found it to be a very transformative kind of alchemical thing. So I'm interested, how have you seen this kind of dovetailing with your pursuit into Jung? For people who don't know, you're reading his collected work. So give people a little overview of why you're doing that and kind of just the influence it's having on your life.
Yeah, man. So I've always been really into psychology, and growing up, I was a staunch atheist. If it didn't make sense logically, or if I couldn't fit it inside of a scientific framework, I thought it was bullshit. And then I found Jung. And he, for me, was the bridge between science and spirituality. And I started to read a couple of his works when I was in college. And I really resonated with it. And at some point in the last 4 or 5 years, I just had the thought, I'm going to read his entire collected works before I'm 30. And I just kind of let that sit in the background for a couple of years. Yeah. And then about 6 months ago, I went to Peru and I did Wachuma and Vilca, which are 2 plant medicines native to South America. And it was such a profound experience that when I came back, I just kind of had this what the fuck feeling of, if not now, when? And so I just started reading the collected works. And it's been the most fulfilling intellectual pursuit I've ever gone on. Interestingly, and this is something that we can get into later if you want, I've actually stopped reading the collected works because some pretty intense stuff happened in my life where I knew I had the tools from Jung to process what happened. And so instead of reading in the morning, I've been writing it. And this has been going on for the last 2 months. And I feel like I'm almost done with the writing. So I'm actually going to get back into the reading. But I think I finished book 8 of the collected works. Yeah. And then a friend put the red book on my desk. Oh, and boy. Yeah. Not the summary of the red book, but the real red book with the pictures. Yeah. Yes. And I started reading that, and it fucked me up in the best way. And it was right around when I started reading the red book that some stuff happened with some relationships in my life that brought up some really old complexes that I used writing as a way to process. So I've actually stopped reading Jung, but I know I'm going to get back to it. And I still believe that I will finish the collected works before I'm 30, even though I know that that's a goal that was made out of my ego. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah. But it is something that came up. And as it involves LSD, what I find LSD helps me do, my default mode, way of looking at the world is very rational and scientific and logical and empirical. But I know I have the mercurial, hermetic, winking side of me, but it's not my default. Right. And LSD it just takes a super small amount. It's just enough to help me click into that mode of being that makes me much more fun in conversation, allows me to pun more and be more goofy, and just helps me see the world through a Jungian lens just a little bit more easily. And once you start to polish that lens of, the hero's journey and the one myth that all the myths are trying to get at, you just see it everywhere. And this is something that I like to write trip reports after I do any type of deep psychedelic work. So I wrote a trip report about my experience in Peru. And one of the first things that I talked about is and I got this idea from Jung, and it's that I think alchemy at its core was not about chemistry, even though it did contribute to chemistry, but that our nervous system is where the alchemy takes place, and our experience is the lead that we can transform into gold. And consciousness, we are the alchemists. Yes. And so you can do it anywhere at any time with any experience.
I have, dude, so many amazing things you said there, and I kind of want to touch on all of them, and I'll do the best I can from the memory because so many amazing things. I highly recommend when you jump back into not just Jung, but anything else related to him is a book written by his translator and disciple, Marie-Louise von Franz. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but Alchemy. It's a insano book. That book to me is like, it's like reading Jung for the first time in terms of like the power it has over the psyche. And you're like, whoa, what? Yeah. Like, what are they saying? Like, why is it? And it's really, really excellent. But I also like that you this is something I admire about you, man, is your intuitive faculties. Even though you say, yes, they're kind of this hidden layer, and my intellect and my logical and analysis is at the front, there's clearly some deep connection to your intuitive faculties because you saw and recognize what I kind of call the consumption production cycle for creative people, which is sometimes you just want to consume. Like, dude, I'm listening to Game of Thrones on audiobook, and I am it's fucking I'm loving it, like just absolutely loving it. It's nothing to do with any creative but I'm loving it. But sometimes the reverse, you just need to produce, you need to write, or you need to make music, or you need to express yourself in whatever modality makes sense for you. And being able to tap into that cycle is really, really powerful, because I think when the disharmony that can come from not being in the right one, pushing when you should be pulling, that causes people so much stress, not just creatively, but just internally for their minds and even their bodies. And the ability to recognize that is fucking brilliant, man. Like that's really, really an important tool that you seem to have cultivated. One other thing I wanted to touch on that you said, and I have a question. I mean, I think about this a lot because I'm a daily cannabis user. So I think of the questions of what are these substances or plants or whatever is going on? How much of it is the plant? How much is the synergy between our consciousness and a plant or substance consciousness? And how much is it as a placebo? How much is this just really just kind of revealing what is naturally there and letting it flow? And I think about psychedelics. I think about this a lot with psychedelics because we know they have a dampening effect on many aspects of the brain neurologically, which is like, okay, well, it's kind of like how stuff works default. Maybe we're confusing it. So do you think microdosing LSD or LSD in general, because you mentioned like, I can have conversations more easily. I can, if things are a little bit funnier, I can see things through a Jungian lens. Do you think that's the LSD doing it? Or do you think it's kind of attuning you to who you naturally are? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think all of these chemicals do have a biological basis where they are producing some type of chemical that makes it easier for a certain mode of being for the brain to tap into. But I like to use a metaphor. I like to just use them, period, because I think that they help people think.
Yes. Yeah.
And the way that I think about it is whatever chemical you take, the first time you take it, the experience that you have, it's like you're unlocking a new room in the home of your psyche. And whatever that first experience is, you will wed with that chemical, but the door is open now. So it's a part of your psyche that you can reach without it. But when you take it, it almost like it teleports you to the doormat of that room. And it's more easy for you to just go explore that part of the mind. But I think you have access to that part of the mind without the chemical. And the chemical is just kind of it's basically like a trigger in any habit loop, and a lot of our existence are the unfolding of habits, and a habit is a trigger or a behavior and a reward. And, for me, LSD is a purposeful and consciously cultivated trigger that brings me to a room in the house of my psyche that I want to go to on weekends, preferably. And I love that room. It's got beautiful windows. It's got some really awesome artwork in there, and I like to go in there.
Yeah, well, it's a fun room, and I think paradoxically that room can kind of upend the rooms or the place we are before we enter the room, which is why psychedelics,
for sure,
I think, are both revered and feared, because that's like a very disturbing, not in a pejorative way, room, for lack of a better term.
No, for sure.
Yeah, man. I mean,
like the light in that room is so bright that it might obscure your vision for a while when you step out of it and all the other rooms look different.
Yeah, you're going to be seeing sunspots for a while, for sure. Yeah, man, I think this is really fascinating. And I love to hear you talk about kind of the intentional use of microdosing, because as you know, this is like, it's funny when anything in psychedelics is like new, like at least mimetically or like in the mainstream of psychedelics, which is still underground. But microdosing is relatively a new phenomenon. I mean, for as much acid was getting passed around back in the days, and you hear about it with like Ram Dass and when he was Richard Alpert with Tim Leary, like they weren't taking small amounts. They were blasting themselves with like 1,500 mics at a time, drinking from vials of like pure LSD. Man. So it's interesting to me that we found this kind of other ground up approach, more grounded approach. And I love speaking to people who are also doing it, because I think it's kind of, I don't want to say pioneering, but like the web of experiences is just beginning to be woven for, you know what I mean? Like it's really, absolutely, it's fucking cool, dude. I love that. So last time we spoke, something that stuck out to me, well, two things. One was I just shifted what I want to talk about in my mind. I was going to talk about Jordan Peterson. We'll save him for the later. But mental illness and psychosis. And since we spoke, I put out an episode called Psychosis and Synchronicity, which is a rare solo episode that I do, and I was blown away. Like, this is one of my most popular episodes ever. And I was beautiful. It was really cool because I was blown away that it was clearly a topic that people were familiar with. And I know from your studying of Jung and his theories on kind of psychosis and what that meant for him personally, you've gleaned a lot about this. And I'm sure you're constantly kind of watching your own mind, because you're reading Jung enough and you're taking LSD. How can you not? What are your thoughts kind of on the relationship between psychosis, mental illness, and, you know, some of the kind of archetypal journeys that people can go on, whether psychedelic induced or not?
This could not be better timing. You could say it's synchronicity. Someone close to me, literally yesterday, had a psychotic episode and had to be taken to the hospital.
Oh, geez.
And I talked to them for an hour and a half the day before. And all my Jungian reading helped me see what was happening in them. Yet I couldn't help them, which was very frustrating. But like, I have complete faith that he's going to be okay. But he truly had a psychotic episode where he was completely detached from empirical reality. And and I've been trying, because I'm the unofficial office psychologist, so everyone's been coming up to me the last day and a half asking me to explain to them what's going on with him.
Yeah.
And, you know, the first caveat is I truly cannot do what is happening internally with him any justice, because it's so beyond my ability to understand. But to answer your question is also to answer their questions. And I think essentially, people who have high IQs and a great ability to be creative, they are most likely to have a quote unquote psychotic episode. And I think we need a better word for it.
Yes.
But it's essentially, it's essentially the psyche's ability. So you have two hemispheres, and one speaks in language and the other one speaks in images, and it's not logical. It's symbolic. And there are people who that part of the brain is very strong, and it tries to communicate with the logical mind. And ideally, it wants to work in tandem with the logical mind to help you adapt to reality. I think it comes down to adapting to reality. And for this specific person, and I think that, so there's something to really articulate here. There's the genetic basis of schizophrenia, which is a very specific type of thing, which just seems to be where the hardware is not working properly. And then there's when people have psychotic episodes who aren't genetically schizophrenic. And so these are two different things. I'm not going to talk about genetic schizophrenia, because I think that is more so the hardware not working, as opposed to something the psyche is doing to help the individual adapt, which I think is what psychosis is. So for this person, clearly there were things that happened in his life that he was not yet ready to face. And it could be as mundane as your significant relationship, should have been ended 6 years ago and you haven't done it.
Yeah,
and
something you've
ignored it.
delayed and
Right.
pushed off and won't face the shadow aspects or the difficulty of doing it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And someone with a high IQ and a strong symbolic brain, they will create layers and layers of symbology and fantasy. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Right.
But they're basically symbols that they can put between their experiencing self and the visceral fact of the uncomfortable truth of whatever it is that is in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get so deep in the symbols that you can lose touch with reality. And like when I was talking to him the day before, man, like he was saying a lot of truly profound things. Like,
Yes.
I think this is something that Jung did that nobody else that I've read about properly did. And it's to pay heed and respect to the way the mind becomes psychotic and what it produces in a psychotic state. And it's truly like, it's the essence of deep art.
Mm-hmm.
Like the things that he was saying were so profound, yet they were not put into any type of implementable framework in reality where it would be genius.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
it was truly madness, but there was deep truth in the things that he was saying, man.
Yeah.
But I think psychosis is essentially what happens when the individual hits an obstacle in the world or in their life that is so potent that they're not ready to face, and the psyche will either try to inflate the self to float above it, or will depress the self to go underneath it. But neither of those two things work in the long run, but they're ways of coping. And so that's why I think bipolar disorder is that's why I think those are the two fundamental spectrums that the psyche can go to. You're either manic or depressive. And really what that is you either create symbolic stories that amplify the feeling of the ego to try to make it strong enough to face the thing, or it's depressive, where the psyche will make the ego so small that it won't try to confront the thing.
Yes.
And I think both can be helpful in the moment, but that the true way forward is to face the thing. And this person specifically was manic. And I have complete faith that he's going to, come back and face it and integrate it. And he will be all the better for this.
Well,
and go on, please.
No, you continue, please.
So to tie this to synchronicity, I think synchronicity is this really beautiful and potent and potentially scary aspect of experience where if you're truly trying to face the things in your life, I think the psyche gives you synchronicities to help you. But also synchronicities seem to be a thing that if you're super adamant to avoid the thing you need to do, that also activates synchronicities, but in a delusional way. And I still don't know how you parse between the genuine synchronicities that are trying to help you forward and the ones that seem to be like this byproduct of a resisting of whatever the obstacle actually is. And then it's feeding the mania or the depressiveness.
This I really cannot thank you enough for that description of a friend of yours and just sharing the story, because this is really meaty stuff that I'm excited to talk about. I'll offer this kind of additive to what you're talking about, where you either go up or down to avoid. I went through an extended period of what would be called psychosis. Was diagnosed as bipolar after the experience and subsequently got undiagnosed as well. I don't know if I'm undiagnosed, but I'm not taking any medications for it and I'm okay. Things are going well for a long time now. So I can tell you this. I think there's a third element to this experience. And I think this is we can see this in saints and mystics and people like Jung who can come out of it. And it's not that there are just two options. It's this third thing that is this genuine, transcendent, your wires are successfully able to interface and integrate in with transcendent wisdom. And you can actually coherently speak and transmit and observe in what we call consensus reality. I think this is where things get weird in terms of my cosmology of reality, is that I believe what we form as the basis of our reality, this consciousness that we all agree on, this is what life is like. This is what I think that's transforming pretty radically. You could say, well, this is some long cycle where this is what happens, or enough people started doing psychedelics where we're changing the consciousness of the planet, or who knows, astrologically, this is the time for this to happen, but it seems like it's happening. And I think if you touch that for long enough, it kind of can fuck with you if you don't know what you're experiencing. And this is exactly when those two states you're speaking about happen. You go up or you go down. And I think maybe there's something to do with the ego. If you can truthfully, because in my case, when I started tying it up with my ego, my experiences, my synchronicities, my downloads, that's when I would say that I moved more into the manic state.
Exactly. Agreed. Right.
Yeah. So it seems like if you're able to touch these states with some sense of egolessness, there really is, this is the diving down into the ocean and finding the pearl that's within the self and bringing it back. That's the key. And I think, it's a very difficult situation, especially when you watch a loved one go through these experiences. But if there's a framework of support that's there and people can actually come out of this, I mean, it truly, I consider one of the greatest gifts of my life, having been able to have this extended experience and then integrate it afterwards into my life and just kind of how I view the world. So, I mean, I think that's maybe the hidden element of when these things happening. And it kind of somewhat answers the question of what are the real synchronicities versus the not ones. I think they're all real. I think that layer of reality exists continuously. It's constantly overlaid with what we process through our senses, just logically and Newtonianly. So when you drift into it and you experience it, I think all of those synchronicities are valid. It's what you do with it afterwards, the certain alchemical tool you're trying to use. Are you taking the lead and turning it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you just made, is that, and I do agree with you that from a phenomenological standpoint, every synchronicity is real, but you make it adaptive based off of how you implement it into the world.
Yes.
And what I was seeing in my friend yesterday was a complete inability to adapt any of them to reality.
Yes.
And then I think that is the foundation of being called psychotic.
Yes.
He said something that was truly interesting that what you were just saying reminded me of, and like one of the delusions, and I still don't think that that's the right word, one of the symbolic manifestations that he experienced subjectively that he thought was an empirical fact of reality, and it might be, but still, I'm going to suspend that for a moment, is that he thought that this is all a simulation and that the AIs were talking directly to him and were telling him that he had to build a thing. And when he said that, like, I explained to him, like, I had a psychotic episode when I was 19, and I just smoked a bunch of weed, but I truly had the experience that it felt like I was inside of a simulation, that this entire life was a computer simulation, and that I was quote unquote waking up, and I could hear what I felt like were the programmers of the simulation. They were behind my head and slightly above me, and I could hear them whispering, "Oh no, he's waking up. He can't wake up. Don't let him wake up." And like, I was so scientific that even though that experience felt so viscerally real, it had the noetic quality to it that afterwards, even though it jarred me for like 6 months, I never allowed myself to buy into it enough. But the experience was enough to radically transform how I acted in the world. Like, before I had that experience, I was failing all my college classes. It was my first year of college, and my GPA was a 0.7.
Wow.
But after that moment, like, it so radically like changed my orientation to the world that I started to like study and to work. And I do think that, like, I'm super grateful that it seems like I only got a single drop of that part of the psyche, and it was enough to radically transform my personality. And my friend yesterday, he got a gallon.
Yes.
You know, and it was just too much. And so I do agree with you that this realm of the psyche, if exposed to in the right dosage, can completely fucking transform you. And so that is the third way. Absolutely.
Yes. And I think, I mean, one of my downloads back in this experience where I would describe it as pre-manic and somewhat just lucidly getting information that I didn't know how it was coming, is that I felt in the next coming decades, these experiences would be reported more and happen with greater frequency. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And we could say there's a level of causality related to psychedelics and consciousness explanations. I don't know. I'm not claiming to know why it would be the case, but I think there is gold in these experiences. And,
absolutely.
And that's the key. Is I think this is what we were talking about last time a little bit too, is that the current, and you mentioned it yourself, the current lens that we look through psychotic episodes is shaped very heavily by our medical institutions that have evolved from many other things. And there's a lot of influences here that I think, like, for instance, I read an article, a study was just published yesterday, saying that people who smoke daily marijuana or cannabis or high potency, 10% THC or more, are like 4 or 5 times as likely to have psychotic episodes. So the first thing I do with any study like this, which is just kind of blanket, sounds funny to me, I just look and see who did it. And it looks like a legitimate study. 907 or so people were studied, and it seemed like there was a greater frequency of psychosis. But to me, the question isn't, we're just taking the term psychotic episodes or psychosis as some blanket term.
Right. How do you quantify that?
Right. Or even qualify, really. I mean, you can see someone in a state, but what does that word mean? What are the symbols attached to it and context attached to it? And I personally think that rather than labeling these and listen, if someone is about to harm themselves, harm other people, physically, emotionally, mentally, like psychologically, these are things that need to be addressed. I'm not suggesting taking a willy-nilly approach and softening the language we use from that aspect, but observing these experiences and looking at them a little bit more, I don't even want to say compassionately, but just through a different lens, I think really could do a lot for people to get through these experiences and also come out with this greatest kind of transformative juice. And, you know, I know you're in a little bit of a different place right now than I am when I talk about this stuff, because you just saw a close friend go through this. And it is just for people who don't know. And I've been, you know, I'm grateful that people come to me a lot when this stuff happens, because they know my experience is very disturbing to go through, to watch someone go through it. They are not, it's like the person you knew has transformed into this person who can't communicate effectively. It's very scary. And I know that from both sides. So I recognize that when I'm talking about the transformative power of psychotic breakdowns, you might be like, oh shit, I don't know, man. I want him to get better. And I think he will. But what I'm saying basically is
I'm
that
completely on board.
Yeah, I think you get it, man, because like it's just one of these things that I also think, dude, that this happens to virtually everyone. Just to be clear, I don't think that's why I hesitate to just buy into this term psychosis, because if it happened to Jung, like it's gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like
for sure,
this guy's prophylactic.
Yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah, and like continue. Yeah.
I had a different friend who I've known for 4 years, who had a psychotic episode, but he's got so many tools. And he called me while it was happening. Mm-hmm. He didn't ingest anything. He was at work. He was squatting, trying to work on something on the floor, and he stood up and he had a head rush. And then his consciousness shifted to a degree where he felt like he was on LSD. And it went on for like 8 hours. And he basically went straight home. He called me when he got home, and he was explaining what was happening to him. He was seeing faces. He was hearing voices. The voices were being really like mean and were saying that he had to die, that he had to go to the jungle in Peru and do ayahuasca and kill himself. And like, but he has a lot of tools, and he sat with it and he worked with it and he journaled. And fast forward a week later, he is super grateful for the experience. He's integrated the experience. His main takeaway from the experience is that he had to break up with the girl that he was dating, because he knew since the beginning that he was dating her out of comfort and complacency for himself, and that he wasn't actually doing what was right for her, and that this was the thing in his life that he had been ignoring for months. And this really intense psychological experience happened that showed him a lot of truths outside the mundane takeaway of you need to end the relationship with the girl that you're seeing in a compassionate way.
Right.
But his way of showing up and being transformed by the experience was to do that. And also his ability now to not judge people has gone down significantly. His ability to cry when he sees a good movie or hears a good song goes up. And so there's a juxtaposition between my friend from yesterday and my really close friend from about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that one tried to implement it in a pragmatic way as soon as the first episode happened, and my other friend had been ignoring implementing it for like probably over a year. And then that's why I believe it exploded in the way that it did. Is like, I truly think that like this experience has scared a lot of the people that I work with, because it was a coworker that it happened to.
Right.
And I think it scares people because people think like the way it happens is you're just completely okay one moment and then everything breaks.
Yeah.
And truly what I have found, especially from reading Jung and from experiencing a lot of this stuff close up, is it's a slow, gradual process.
Yes.
And you have to say the same no, dozens and dozens of times for it to break in this way. And by it, I mean the ego structure. And so I just wanted to share that story to say that I actually completely agree that these psychic floods are invitations to transform. And while it can be very chaotic in the midst of the flood, I'm completely on board that it's a call to adventure.
Well, yeah. And I think also what you're getting to here is a theme that I think is applicable to every single, I actually know this. I'm confident in saying that, is this idea of doing shadow work and confronting your shadow. And it struck me because I'm dealing with a calf injury, and the way you were talking about kind of the cumulative slow build of psychic tension related. This is what happened to me with my calf. I was doing dumb things. It wasn't a sudden thing, but it was a cumulative, wasn't eating that well, overexertion, didn't stretch, did a dumb exercise. And it resulted in what is now a major wake up call that you need to be a little more conscious about what you're doing with your body. The same thing can be applied to your mental health and your psychological health. And it's just, there's the macro is always in the micro. There's fractals. We get it. Bro. But dude, I think this theme of exploring shadow sides is what effectively keeps someone tethered and honest. Like the term, like you're keeping them honest, keeping yourself honest. That is literally like, if you want to pursue deep consciousness matters. And this, just to be clear, anyone can have a psychotic breakdown. It does not have to be because you're plunging into Jung or anything else or taking psychedelics. Sure. It can just happen. But if you delve into those types of things, you're confronted with them more presently and more. They're larger. They loom larger. So if you ignore them, I think it has a greater impact psychically than if you like, a little noticing. That's their gift, and potentially you would say their curse, although I wouldn't refer to it as that. But the danger, I guess, of propelling yourself into psychosis or a psychotic breakdown. But I mean, I know for me, every time I know I've done something fucked up, or I could loosen up here, or I shouldn't be doing that, or I should be more forgiving, and I ignore it, it eventually builds.
For sure.
And you can never really see it. That's the thing. It's not like a leg injury where it's like, oh shit, it can manifest all over your life. And you know this from like archetypal projection and complexes. It's fascinating. So I'm curious for you, like what's some shadow work? And I know I love reading your stuff, man. I think it's so inspiring and it's great because it's so transparent. What's your shadow work that you do for yourself?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And just to touch on the whole idea of shadow work, I think that the entire quote unquote spiritual community could drastically improve its ability to help people if the teachers and the influencers in this space really studied and shared the findings of evolutionary psychology. Because I think we come into the world with programming because we have this meat suit that has evolved on this planet in a very specific way. And a lot of the drives of our meat suit that are inherent in our ego are the core pieces of our shadow. Like all of us want power. All of us want to be able to fuck whoever we want to fuck. All of us want to be able to do whatever the fuck we want to do whenever the fuck we want to do it. But those are core animal drives. And then on top of that, from the moment we start aggregating memories, we are instilling the story that our parents and culture have told us we need to put on top of our drives. And like the way the brain is structured is your primary drives are at the core of your brain. They're at the, like where your brain stem starts to move into your actual brain. Those drives are always on. Like you're always running those programs, and your prefrontal cortex is, when it's working properly, is constantly inhibiting the drives and transforming them in ways that are culturally acceptable.
Right.
Freud would call that the superego.
Yes.
But our personalities are essentially the cortex story that we're using to inhibit our drives. But our drives are where our shadows come from. So one of my core shadow pieces, and this is why I love dreams, because dreams will give you symbols that will show you, they will use symbols from your actual life to represent your shadow aspects to you. And one of my core shadow aspects is Frank Underwood from House of Cards. Sure. And basically what that represents is using my ability to articulate to get what I want, even if it's not good for anyone else around me. Right. And so that's something that I constantly, like, my highest value really is to be in truth and in love with what I say and what I do. And I don't ever go a day where I'm perfect, but I know that when I say something that I know is not true, that I said in a way to either make the situation easier for me or to get what I want from it, I can viscerally feel in my body come apart 1 inch. Like I feel like I'm slightly less together. And it's almost like I know, like, if I get too far apart, I need to sit down and I need to journal and I need to look at what the fuck am I doing? Why am I lying? Why am I hedging my truths? Why am I not saying complete truths in my relationships or at work or with myself? So a core one for me is using my speech truthfully. And the way that I kind of keep a pulse on that is, what does my body feel like when I'm talking? And if I get too far apart, I know I need to sit the fuck down. I need to journal. And I've cultivated this a bit. I've cultivated the habit of being blisteringly honest with myself when I write. And so I know that my writing is a way that I can recalibrate. And I use Instagram as a platform for me to have those blisteringly honest conversations with myself publicly. Because I know personally that my writing, if I'm just writing for me, I write more sloppily. But if I have the expectation that other people will read it, I imagine that they're my closest friends and like that me being honest will help my tribe. And so I actually leverage my addiction to social media to help me do these things where I try to fucking eviscerate a part of my ego that might be too much in the shadow.
I mean, it's brave work, my friend. It's not something that most people aspire to or engage with because it's scary, it's vulnerable, and that especially as a guy, just to be clear, like this theme has been emerging from on my show the past couple of months or so, which is the woundedness of patriarchal system, that how it's hurting men, how it's hurting the male people, and the lack of being able to be vulnerable and learning some lessons about emotional intelligence and, competencies is really a thing. It's like, this is the medicine we need. Another reason I admire you, and it reminds me what you're talking about. It reminds me of the Eightfold Path, the doctrine of using speech compassionately, right speech. That's how you use right speech. When you are honestly putting out into the world, recognizing the impact of what you're saying, which is your kind of discerning between whether it's for you or for someone else, that's really powerful. And I think that's also something you mentioned, like, spiritual world can learn from evolutionary psychology. And I think, that's very true. Daniel Goleman's written some excellent stuff on that. I really think that we need this layer of transparency. If this is going to be real medicine for people, if this is going to be a real tool or skill that people can acquire, whatever it is, there has to be this transparency. And this is a lesson that keeps getting presented to me no matter where I try to go. So I have to assume there's some validity, at least personally. Yeah. But I mean, it really is important. And I don't think, we live in a time where it's harder and harder to do that. I think one of the aspects of social media and just kind of how we present ourselves to the world is we have this opportunity to cultivate and present what we want to. And usually the things we want to present are the good things, how well we're doing, how great things are, how happy we are. And I think that's great. There's nothing wrong with that intention and desire. That's a beautiful thing. But what we don't see is all the stuff we try to ignore in our regular lives, the fights, that this didn't go well, the injuries, the annoyances, the blow-ups, all of these things. And I think sharing those experiences not only engage people in a much more profound way, but it truthfully is like, that's what you have to do if you want genuine connection. If you're appearing to someone as someone who has it all figured out and you don't, which is almost none of us, right. Like that shit is a schism that essentially has to be rectified at one point or the other. So yeah, man, I think that's really, I could not be happier with your answer about shadow work. And it's just truthfully something I encourage everyone to do. I mean, it's really fucking awesome, dude. I love that.
I'm truly glad that you're as honest as you are about that and reflecting that back to me. And the thing that I really have to be like upfront about is that I've taken the time to try to integrate my primary evolutionary drives towards behaviors that I believe will help, the collective. Like a part of me truly believes that the way I become the most powerful thing that I can be is to be as honest as I can be with as many people as I can be, because that allows me to get honest feedback from the intelligence of the collective to then use to shape who I am and to who I could be. And to build on top of that, like, I truly believe that my potential, I think each person's highest potential is their God. And I truly believe that that thing is watching each of our lives right now. And that thing knows when I'm bullshitting. That thing knows when I'm lying. That thing knows when I'm playing small. And I've created such a strong metaphysical story for myself that it's almost impossible for me to have a good day if I feel like I'm not acting in a way that is in accordance with at least my current self trying to become that thing. And so, like, it's kind of a pain in the ass. Like, if I go on a walk and I see garbage outside, every single day I want to walk by it, and then I feel bad and I can't walk by it, and I pick it up almost begrudgingly. And like, but I think that that's kind of that's the cost that I think you pay for grace. Like, I really think that grace is your relationship to yourself is so pristine that it's almost like the world kind of transforms to give you opportunities. But once you feel grace, you know, like you are now responsible for acting in a way that keeps it. And so like, even though I'd really like to say, like, I'd really like to sleep with this girl that I know that I could sleep with right now, but a part of me knows that I don't want to be with her long term, and she would expect that. So we're going to hang out soon, and I'm going to have to tell her that, and I'm not going to get to orgasm inside of a beautiful woman. I can't do that now. Like, the story I've made for myself, I couldn't do that and still be in grace. So, you know, there's a cost.
I, again, love that you're pulling up these subtle and universal truths that I've thought about but rarely get to speak about, because when are you going to speak about these things? Luckily, podcasts exist and you exist. Yeah, man, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think because I used psychedelics at a very early age, I came in contact with that. And every single time I've dismissed knowing better, it has cost me something. And I think it's a somewhat dangerous game to play, because you can psych yourself out. You can come up with false narratives to excuse negative or positive behavior. So there's a whole game, but dropping in again, I mean, I think you sell yourself a little short on your intuitive faculties, just because this is a very subtle thing that I think is present. And yeah, it gets hard. What you're basically saying, and this has been my experience too, is that it gets harder to do bad shit. It gets harder to not fix things that are fixable. It gets harder to not recycle the thing you know should be recycled, even if you have to wash it out and it's a pain in the ass. Like, those little things, they do kind of influence. I can say that I think over time, like any practice that you do, it stops becoming a burden or seeming like a curse. And then you can slowly shift into enjoying picking up the piece of garbage. And when that happens, what is that if not grace, right? It can transformed something that you used to hate. You know, like sometimes like I don't know when it happened. When I was a kid, I never liked to shovel snow. I enjoy shoveling snow now. Like, what the fuck is wrong with me? But it's because I've kind of like zenned it out for myself. It's like a pleasurable physical activity that accomplishes something, and I can see it being removed. So yeah, man, I know what you're talking about. There is a cost. I think it's a good cost, and I think it's a good exchange for humanity and ourselves at the end of the day, because I think, you know, I know a lot of people who disregard that voice, who know better and are aware of it. It doesn't typically lead to happiness and fulfillment. And
for sure,
that's usually what we're searching for on a deep level. So yeah, man, I totally get what you're talking about. It's awesome.
And a thing that I've been playing with that's really kind of been fucking me up, and I don't have a resolution to this, but like just the last couple of weeks, I've started to really try to pray. You know, because I would sometimes, but I've just been trying to lean into like running the experiment of what it would be like to pray. And whenever I pray, like I can feel myself, I feel my ego having a story where I have to pray in almost like a careful way. But then I think of like, what if whatever you want to call God or source or consciousness, whatever word you want to use, what if it is so loving that it has no expectations of how we have to be in order for it to give us love, but it will take on whatever story we want to project. So what if I'm projecting that I have to pick up trash to have grace? Like, what if I'm projecting that I can't sleep with whoever I want and still have grace?
Yes.
I don't have the answers to this, but it's something that like it's almost like the source is so loving that it will hold whatever stories we want to project on it. And it's like, okay, if you think you have to be like this to have me love you, okay, fine. You know, like I'm always here, and but I also can't shake the feeling that there are things that feel like universal morals that I can't seem to bring myself to transgress and feel like I have grace. But a part of me feels like that's just my programming, and that's okay. And that maybe the uniqueness of every person is everyone has their own unique programming that they have to come into accordance with for them to have grace. And there's no universal path to it.
Yes, I mean, dude, I love, again, what you're speaking about. Maybe it's the LSD, maybe it's just you, Eric, probably just you. But I think that love you're talking about, I think that is accurate. I think that's what a lot of people have built into the symbolic mythology of Jesus Christ and Christ consciousness. I think we find this in many other traditions, Bhakti yoga, many forms of Buddhism. There's a lot of stuff there. And I think in my experience, that is accurate. Now, what that means and what the interplay of that is and what the ramifications of that are in your life and your ability to recognize morally right and wrong is the story of a life. The truth is that we're not always going to be able to act from our higher selves. Things aren't always going to go well. So it's often those opposite times when we break down that we can actually see that love shine through and realize that, yeah, you know what? Maybe when you talk to this girl, maybe she's just as into the idea of having sex without a relationship. Who knows? This is something that I think we find out more and more as we realize female empowerment is like, just because we think they're the fairer sex and never want, casual sex, not true. Not fucking true. Like, it's not true. That's not what I want. So I reverse project it out into the world and say, oh, well, if this is something I want, that's not something they want. But you don't know. Reality is this weird cauldron of people, experiences, ideas, emotions. And it's hard to pin down sometimes what is, the right approach in this. But I do think if the internal mechanism that allows you to recognize things isn't browbeating you, isn't making you feel shitty that you have to do something, then it's a little more valid. If it feels like, I'm not doing this because of some rigid moral code, and we're not talking about murder and rape here, obviously, but like reality is quite malleable, which is just to tie this again to the psychosis stuff. That's why I have a hard time labeling things as psychosis and breaks from reality, because my understanding of reality is this is not very solid at all. It's quite unsolid. Therefore, that to determine something is outside of the norm is just kind of a risky game to play. But I do think that loving presence you're referring to, from my experience, seems to be the fundamental basis of our reality, Earth, where we live in 3 dimensions. And that's a very comforting thing. And just to go back to the prayer stuff too, man, like, prayer is really interesting because I've noticed the same things when I pray is like you're doing your prayer act, you're putting on your prayer persona, you're getting into the mood.
Yeah.
But if you do it enough, you will get that genuine like prayer, like, oh my God, I'm doing it. Like, this is right. Don't lose it. But this is really like, I just prayed right there. That was really me connecting with some divine source and asking or receiving whatever it is. And yeah, man, I liken it to like, when you hear a song, you for the first time and you love it and it just hits you so deeply, and then you hear it maybe like 10 times, you're super into it, and then you go back later and you try to recapture the feeling. It's like you're playing the person who wants to like the song. Once you can drop back into it, you can have that original appreciation on some level. So yeah, dude, I mean, you've just dropped so many bombs of wisdom. It's funny because I know we had a conversation, for people who don't know that were listening, where it was an amazing conversation. I think I microdosed that day too. So we were just like flying, and it was awesome, but then it didn't record. We had tried to set this up for like a month, but man, I'm happy we got this one, and I can assure you it is recording and recorded. Dude, you're just a wonderful person, and I really admire your honesty and transparency. And I say that in all truth, man. It's great.
I truly appreciate it, brother. And, again, I said this on the last call, and I just want to articulate it again. I have seen such a tremendous growth in you since the first time we podcast, where there's this lightness and this self-confidence and this kind of compassion for yourself and for people that you don't agree with. That I love podcasting, and I can see that there's been a lot of transformation that's happened in you, and it's been beautiful to witness.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And I think there's a lot of truth to it too. podcasting, can you talk about your new podcast, please?
Absolutely, yeah. So I podcasted for about a year before I got the job on it, and it was called the Meta Programming Podcast.
Yeah.
And whenever I would say that name, nobody knew what the fuck I was talking about.
I loved being on it, by the way. It was like truly one of my most favorite experiences. It was really good. Just want to throw that out there. Yeah.
I would love to have you back on, and we can debate about Jordan
Peterson.
Oh,
yeah. Next time we'll get to it. Yes.
For sure. But a couple of people helped me understand, like, even though I like that name, I'm not helping people by making it as obscure as it was. So we changed it to The Myths That Make Us. And it's still kind of it's still the same aim, which is to help people. Truly, I try to help the guests articulate their myth in a way where anyone listening could reproduce it in their own life. And I just find that, like, I want to podcast the rest of my life. I love the depth that you can get with someone when you have the container of a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, so many people in my life that I've been friends with for like 6 years, I do one podcast with them and we go deeper and talk about things that we never shared in 5 years of a friendship. And we got to those depths in an hour. And it's dramatically increased my ability to articulate. It's increased my ability to talk to anyone. And I also love that feeling of you have a new idea in the midst of a conversation. Like, and so I actually do a tremendous amount of learning in podcasting.
Yes, of course.
Like, I come to new ideas while I podcast, and it's just, I love it. And it's something that I want to do the rest of my life.
Yeah, The Myths That Make Us. Dude, I think about my pod network down the line. I really just appreciate speaking with you. Let's do these questions that wrap up the show. And
for sure.
Yeah. All right. What's your favorite color?
My favorite color, my ego's favorite color is green. The color that I see the most when I meditate is like this, mix between dark red and purple.
Very interesting. What's your favorite number?
13.
Yeah. I think I knew that because that's my favorite too. What's your favorite animal?
Owl.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen a couple of spirit animals on when I've done certain psychedelics or holotropic breathing, but the animal that I most resonate with is the owl.
I love it. Last question. Practical tip that has helped you in your life that you could share with people listening.
Whenever you can, speak in as much truth with love as you're capable of doing.
Period. Exactly. I was going to say, what else can be said? Erick, truthfully, an honor and pleasure to speak to you. I just keep it up, man. You're doing great. It's just wonder and privilege to see you evolve and kind of change people's minds as well as your own.
Thank you so much, brother.
All right, bud. We'll speak soon.
Always.
Peace. Thank you for listening to that episode. Erick, special guy, erickgodsey.com. Go check him out. Doing lots of cool stuff, writing, speaking, podcasting. Just a cool dude. Go check them out. Thank you for everyone who listens to the show, past the music, all of the stuff. I'm going to jam this one out there. I don't know what the hell that means. I'm going to wrap this one up pretty quickly because I got to get back to dad duties. Big thanks to Alexis's mom, Victoria, for coming over to allow me to record this. Big thanks to everyone who listens. Go rate and review on iTunes, why don't you? Four Sigmatic, all these other things I asked you to do. I know life is hard. I know life is busy. I know it. God, I know it. One of those things. Pretty good. For me, if you did it. All right. That's it. I'll see you next week.